Okay, good morning class, or good afternoon I guess it is. It's 1 o'clock. If you're watching live. If you're watching on tape delay, it could be any time. Everybody knows class goes out live, even over the airwaves, and also it's on live streaming at rsu.tv. So a couple of people told me they have to leave early today, so I certainly understand that. So hopefully I don't have to leave early. I'll try not to disappear, but I appreciate you always letting me know. That's always good. So at any rate, a couple things. Here we are in class 3, session 3, and I'm still doing some housekeeping things on the syllabus. I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll realize, hey, I forgot to tell my class such and such. So a couple things I wrote down actually this time. The exams, or I prefer to call them show-off opportunities, right, for our class. We have 3 of them during the course of the semester, about every 5.5 weeks or so. What I do is those for this class will be online. Now we have a proctoring system that I'll give you more detail about later. I think we have a new system for the university, that's my understanding. But what I do is typically I open a 24-hour window for you to take the exam. I don't think I mentioned this, okay? So you can take the exam at a time of your choosing during that 24 hours. So, I mean, it's possible we could have students in this class, since it's kind of it's online, it's synchronous, it's asynchronous. There's several sections here combined in this broadcast and so forth. So it's possible we could have a student taking this class, or one of your classmates could be around the world somewhere, okay? So we don't want to inconvenience them by requiring an exam. They set for an exam at 2 o'clock in the morning. So at any rate, wherever you are on the planet, whatever your circumstances are, presumably whatever your work schedule is and so forth, hopefully you can accommodate some time within a 24-hour period to peel off 90 minutes to take an exam. So that's basically the idea there. So if you got any concerns about that, let me know. As far as the homework goes, you know, I've started putting a few things online. Today you'll see, after class, you'll see I'll put a few other things on. We're using, for our text, this McGraw-Hill text, we are using Connect. That's the name of the online homework platform. So for this book, okay, it's great if you got a hard copy of some sort, but the e-text is available on Connect. By the way, always read your book, okay? So whatever format it's in, I assume you read your book. That's just part of being in college, okay? So I don't make any excuses for that. But there'll be things that I don't mention in class that you'll want to know. So if it's in the book, you need to know, okay? Unless I mark it off. I delineate something, say, hey, you don't need to know this. And as we get closer to an exam, I'll let you know some things. But hopefully the homework, back to the homework now, the homework will kind of incline you or encourage you to get in the book, okay? So be sure and read the text. Must read the text to be successful in here. But as far as that homework goes on Connect, as I put those assignments up, the first group of those will be due on the eve of the first exam. And I allow you multiple attempts on each one, okay? Multiple attempts. The very first one, I place a few more constraints because I want to make sure everybody gets into the program early on in the class and so forth. But you have multiple attempts and I take your highest score, okay? So you can't beat a deal like that, right? So there'll be sometimes when maybe you have only 3 attempts allowed for certain assignments, but kind of generally speaking, I allow for an unlimited number of attempts. So the homework allows you to practice and so forth, so I want to encourage you to do that. Okay, so if you got any questions, again, about the procedure in this class, let me know. And you're probably not the only one with that question, so I would appreciate any questions on that order, and then I can address them the next time we meet. So just to make sure everybody's on the same page. I pulled this quote out of Adam Smith. Can we go to the doc? Yeah. Now, sorry here, I haven't, there we go. Mallory's a big help today. I did cue this up first. But here we go. I just found this. This is a very famous line in that tome, that big book we were looking at, I believe, last time. It's a famous economics book. Would be on anyone's list of 50 great works in Western literature. Believe it or not, an economics book ranks up there somewhere close to Shakespeare, I guess. But he wrote more plays than books. But at any rate, the idea here is that this is really, in its day when it was written, this was a very big paradigm shift in economic thinking. So we talked last time about moving from the mercantilistic system to market economies, free markets, and so forth. And the exponent of free markets, the very first one, was Adam Smith, who in his Wealth of Nations, or the longer title is An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, but in the Wealth of Nations, he has a metaphor there he uses for free markets called the invisible hand, or at least for how free markets work. Anybody remember what year the Wealth of Nations was published in? Gosh, class. Same year as the Political Declaration of Freedom in 1776 for our country, right? It was coincidentally, but maybe not so coincidentally, in that both of these, things don't happen in a vacuum. So the idea of liberty in the political sphere and liberty in the economic sphere, it would make sense that those would occur at the same time or something. So at any rate, I was going to read this real quick here. It says, Smith says, in this metaphor, it says, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, okay, or the brewer or the baker that we expect our dinner. Now, they do provide us things that we eat and so forth, the butcher. If there weren't butchers around, I wouldn't have hamburger. But it's not from their benevolence that we get our dinner that puts food on our table. But it's from their regard to their own self-interest. Okay, so you may have heard the term, and this is akin to, it's not exactly what he's saying, but you may have heard the expression, greed is good. Okay, so that's kind of where this is landing here, is that self-interest. The self-interest motive, if you will, actually works to the greater good for the broader economy, that we all pursue our self-interest. So we address ourselves not to their humanity, but to their self-love. I never talk to them of our own necessities, but of their own advantages. So what's he saying? Smith is saying here is that economics is all about incentives. And when people are incentivized, I say people, I mean workers, entrepreneurs, citizens in general, buyers and sellers and so forth, everybody is incentivized to look after themselves and to better their own lot. It turns out that there's this, as if an invisible hand is moving all of us in one direction, and that direction is toward the greater common good. And later in economics, we talk about social welfare, okay? And sometimes we'll put a function on this thing, okay? For math, a function is inputs and gives you an output. So we try to actually quantify social welfare, the benefit that accrues, say, to buyers and sellers in a market. We try to put a dollar value on that sometimes in economics. But what you're going to see before this course is over is that when economic actors are free to pursue their self-interest, say buyers and sellers, buyers can charge an optimal price and sellers can shop around to find the best deal. When all of that's allowed to occur, then the macroeconomy is going to be the best off, okay? And so that's the invisible hand in a nutshell, and I wanted us just to kind of think on that. We'll be coming back to that in this class. So, in here we talk about three economic systems, three types of economic systems. We mentioned laissez-faire is let it be. You may have read that in your reading there. I mentioned it in the first day just a little bit. That's more than just a Beatles song, right? Let it be. But laissez-faire means minimalist role for the government. I guess I'm done with this right here. Thank you, Mallory. Appreciate it. A minimalist role for the government would be, okay, we need the government to defend the shores, carry the mail, or help carry the mail, enforce contracts, property rights. And that's about it. Okay? And that's a laissez-faire approach. I think, what page was the three? I hope you've read this by now, where it talks about the three economic systems. I believe that was in chapter 1. Here I go, though. I don't remember. I wrote it down somewhere right before class, and you'll see Dr. J is not always in tune with things. Anybody know what page that is? Three economic systems. I guess it's on page 27. Okay, so they'll talk there about the laissez-faire system. Let it be. Okay, so it has a minimalist role for government. There's not really a pure laissez-faire economic system anywhere on the planet, but there's a lot of virtues for the laissez-faire system that's very efficient and so forth, and it allows for this invisible hand, okay, that we just talked about. It allows for the invisible hand to have maximum freedom and to do its best, do the most good for the economy. At the other extreme, your book talks about the command system. In economics, you can have the other extreme, the other pole here. Instead of allowing individuals to do what's in their best interest. That's what Smith said we need to do. Okay? Before that time, before he came along, we had to a great degree, we had command systems in the West. When I mean the West, I mean Europe, because the New World was just opening up. 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? So in the 16th century, the 1500s, you had mercantilistic systems where the crown heads, the kings and the sovereigns, the kings and the queens of the various countries, especially Great Britain, Spain, and so forth, were calling the shots. And there was an attempt to tell everybody how to make a living, what things to buy and sell, and so forth. So there was a purposeful policy, macroeconomic policy at that time and amongst the nations to bring as much wealth into in their respective countries as possible. So you had a lot of gold going into Spain and Great Britain and so forth, raw materials in particular. So as I mentioned previously, so that the value-added production could be done at home. So you could sell goods abroad that were worth more than what you were bringing in and so forth. But you have these problems with a command system like that. Can you imagine one person or one bureau or one committee determining what everybody does in a macroeconomic system? So you had this, what's called a coordination problem. Okay? In a command system, you have a coordination problem. Coordinating all this activity in the macroeconomy. That's impossible to do on a computer, really. I mean, because as human beings, I mean, it's kind of hard sometimes to completely model human behavior because human beings are complex individuals, or complex entities. And so you've got a whole bunch of human beings you're trying to encourage to act in a certain way that creates maximum social welfare or economic welfare. That's pretty hard to do. The Soviet Union's tried such a thing in the 20th century. Believe it or not. I mean, they had economists right there in Moscow who were making decisions about what to produce and how much to charge for what's produced. And problem is, if you got a little problem in a supply chain anywhere, oh, we don't have enough steel over here. Oh, that ripples through the whole economy. Then you have not enough automobiles, and then you don't have enough scissors to cut paper with, and so forth. All this ripples through when you have just one little hiccup somewhere. In a system that's a command system where you have one person calling all the shots. Instead of letting us all have some degree of autonomy and taking on risk ourselves. So if you're an automaker and you need steel, you're probably going to have a backup plan, right? Probably going to have a backup plan if a steel mill goes down over here, or if there's a tariff on aluminum or steel, or rubber for tires, what have you. Something happens, some other country is shutting off exports to your country. You're probably going to have a backup plan. One thing is you probably are going to purchase insurance as a supplier, supply insurance and so forth. So we on the individual level learn how to manage risk in a freer system than a command system. So a command system, again, that's a second system in general. We're talking about laissez-faire at one end, let it be, let minimalist role for the government. At the other is a command system. Command system, you have the coordination problem. You also have an incentive problem, okay? People don't work very hard in a communist system. Communism's a form of command system. So is socialism, fascism, and so forth. And we can talk about the difference in those a little bit, read about those, but you have an incentive problem as well as a coordination problem. People that just don't, especially in a communist system, you don't own anything, okay? Everything's owned by the government. Now you think about what you would do as a private entrepreneur if someone else is going to own your business and someone else really has first claims to the fruits of your labor. They give you a part of what you earned as a shopkeeper, someone who owns a store or something like that. You're probably not going to work very hard, right? So you have an incentive problem there. In the middle, between these two extremes, in the middle is a market system. This is where most of the world is. The United States, we have a market system. It's kind of a mix. You have private ownership of resources. You have the use of markets, though. Therefore, we call it market system. Use of markets that bring buyers and sellers together. Okay. So we're going to see, when we talk about a market system, we're going to see that the government's kind of the rule-making authority, if you will, and they make sure contracts are enforced and there's no fraud and so forth in the economy. But beyond that, there's a great degree of freedom. At least we enjoy that in the United States, or have. We have markets. Markets are venues or places where buyers and sellers come together. I want to remember that. Places where buyers and sellers come together. And there's two types of markets. Two types. There's product markets. So if you go to Walmart as a consumer, you're buying a finished product, okay? You're buying a calculator. Here's my TI-35. You're going to buy one of those at Walmart. You're participating in a product market. That's where most of us think about markets. Okay, where the seller is a firm and the buyer is a household. Okay. Now those roles can reverse in another market called a resource market. Okay. In a resource market, the buyer is firms and the sellers are households. Okay, resource markets. Households sell things like labor. I'd like to tell you, but you wouldn't believe it. But I'd like to think that I would show up for work even if the university didn't pay me. I really enjoy teaching that much. So I just might, but I probably at some point would say, I just can't afford to do this anymore. So the university pays me. Now you think about it a second. The university provides a salary to me, a household, if you will. I represent a household. So in that instance, I am the seller. I'm selling my labor to someone else. Okay? That's a different kind of market than at Walmart, right? Walmart, I'm a buyer. Here, I'm actually selling. I'm selling my labor. If you're a business owner, you're selling, the product or service you provide. If you're an attorney, you're selling services and so forth. So you may earn rents, you may earn wages, you may earn profits, and so forth. So all this is kind of modeled in something we're going to be looking at called the circular flow. Let's look at this just briefly, kind of a look later here in chapter 2. We're going to hopefully get to chapter 3 just a little bit today. But look on page 37 of your text. And we call this the circular flow. We begin to envision how a macroeconomy works with this thing right here, this picture right here. I think this idea of a circular flow actually goes back to the French physiocrats back there 300 years ago, and they kind of described the macroeconomy is having a circulatory system, if you will. All wealth derived from agriculture and so forth. We don't have to get into that, but I kind of think they brought about this thing that today we kind of understand how the economy works. You have two institutions here in the very simplest model. You have households and businesses. Now there's government in here too, and there's also a foreign sector out here too. So we could augment this a little bit, make it more real world. But remember now, economic models are simplified descriptions of how the world works. So you got to start somewhere. So we're starting here. This is a very simple idea of how the macroeconomy works. So if you look here, you got two institutions, households and businesses, and then you have two places where they come together as buyers and sellers. You have resource markets and you have product markets. So here what we commonly think of as a product market, of course, businesses sell goods and services to households. So you got the arrow going this way. And the payments for that go this way. Okay? So for your household, you have expenditures for heat, for your house, or for food on your table and so forth. Those are called expenditures. There's technically a difference between an expense and expenditure. We won't get into that right now. But to the business, the top line on their income statement is called revenue. So you have this thing coming into the business called revenue. So this is a monetary flow this way. Kind of describes what's going on here in the product market. And then, of course, in the resource market, the roles reverse. Okay, so you see here, you see the monetary flow going this way. Money, income, in the form of wages, rents, interest, and profits. There's are 4 different categories there of income that flows to households. So you might rent out a room in your house, okay, to someone. That would be a form of income. Money, income. You might have a job, you'd have wages. You might be loaning your money out, might have bought some corporate or government bonds. You earn interest, okay. Profits, maybe you started a business and you're looking for a bottom line here on the income statement. Don't want to get too accounting honest here because this is just basic economics, but this is what's left over from your revenue down here, okay, after a business pays its expenses. So you might be looking for profits and so forth. In exchange, a household will provide labor, land, capital. These are your resources we've talked about, okay, land, labor, capital, and the fourth one's special because it's that know-how. It's that special thing, that little twinkle in some people's eyes. They know how to combine the other 3 to make a profit. It's called entrepreneurship, okay? A long word there. If you're an entrepreneur, you know how to combine the other 3 factors of production or resources, if you will. Sometimes you'll hear the term factors of production to generate these payments that go to households. So at any rate, these provide resources to businesses. And of course, in exchange, we consider the cost of doing business as necessary to acquiring those resources. So we'll be expanding on this model later. Again, we'll add a government. We'll add government here in the middle. Can't forget them. Heavens, there's money that flows from households to the government. What do you call that? Taxes, right? Now, I don't have very many of these, but I hope I'm not breaking the law when I do it. Oh, I got some that say 20. I thought I had one that said 1. Real quick here. Okay, I'm being facetious. This thing right here, there you go. I don't think. It's amazing what people will do for a piece of that green stuff there, right? That's called money. Money. It has value. Well, yeah, sure, money has value. Money's always. Why? Your book's going to talk about money in a little bit. One of the great inventions of mankind. There's different forms of money, but think about it a second. This little piece of green paper right here, I'd hate to try to warm my house with these things. Take a bunch of them, right, in the fireplace. It doesn't really taste very good with salad dressing on it either. Maybe green, might get your greens, right? My mother always tried to get me to eat my greens. She's not here though, so Sunday at lunch, waitress asked, "Do you want broccoli on your potatoes?" I said, "No, my mother's not here. I don't have to eat it." So I don't eat as much green stuff perhaps as I should. I sure wouldn't want to eat that. It has no intrinsic value, yet it's worth something, right? It's worth something. Why is that piece of green paper worth something? We call it, by the way, fiat money. Fiat money. Different than commodity money. A gold coin, gold's always had something. You can melt it down, it's still worth a lot. It has intrinsic value. That's money, and there's lots of different forms we could talk about. Your book looks at this a little bit. Commodity money has intrinsic value. Fiat money, though, has value because the government says it does, okay? You're supposed to accept it for payments. What's it say on this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. It's actually a Federal Reserve note. It used to be Treasury notes. It has a different connotation today, but printed by they're issued by the Federal Reserve. But the point is, it has value simply because it doesn't taste good, it doesn't heat your house. But the government says, you know what? You got to pay taxes. And if you're going to pay taxes, you got to pay in those things right there. It's got to be, you got to pay, you write a check, pay cash. It's got to be denominated in dollar terms. The government forces you to make payments to that other sector in that circular flow we were just looking at. I said we'll put the government on there a little bit. And I said, what flows into the government? Taxes. From households flow taxes to the government. So when we augment that, you have that. Well, you got to pay in a certain form of money. Okay, you might like to take a chunk of copper to to the U.S. Treasury and say, I'm paying my taxes, and they're going to laugh at you, right? If you keep doing that enough, they'll get annoyed at you. They want payment in U.S. dollars, okay, or something that could, represents U.S. dollars. So the government forces us by law to accept this as money. Otherwise, why would you work an hour for a little green thing that says 20, has Andrew Jackson's picture on it? But the government forces that. So you have payment. So when we augment that circular flow, we'll see that there's a payment that comes into the government in the form of taxes. And then, it's circular, so there must be something coming out of that institution, that third institution we'll look at, that's returning to households. And so some of y'all might be experiencing this in the form of transfer payment from the government, public assistance to go to school, okay? Social Security checks and so forth. Lots of other things the government does for us in return for the taxes that we pay. So at any rate, that's a little high level, I know, but we will, in the course of this classes, we'll be expanding on that and so forth. Now, okay, last time when we broke, we were looking at the production possibilities curve. Okay, so I asked you to think about something just a little bit. Let's see here, production possibilities. Let's see, I've got the one we were looking at here. Does everybody have a copy of that? Hopefully you do. You still have that. I want to refer to that. There's one in your text as well. But let's just review this. I hope at night before you go to sleep, you just kind of, after you say your prayers, of course, but then you think, okay, I'm going to think about economics because that will for sure put me to sleep. Especially if I think about, again, how Dr. J's monotone voice. But I hope you've thought of this since we talked about it last time. Even if it's in the midnight hours, the production possibilities frontier or curve. So we looked at this last time. This is kind of a model of the macroeconomy. We've divided all the output in an economy into two different types of goods. In the old books, it was guns and butter. But at any rate, so we got military goods, we got food here on the right. Now my question to you last time was, we looked at this a little bit, we put it on the whiteboard. In a two-good economy, you can talk about the cost of one good without certainly referencing money at all. Okay, when you talk about opportunity cost, that's the value of the most valuable thing you forego or you give up. So last time we computed say for this economy, what is the cost of the very first, the opportunity cost of the very first ton of food? And so you can express that cost and the most valuable thing you gave up. That's pretty easy to select what that would be. It would be over here on the horizontal axis. It's a military good. Okay, I just used Abrams tanks here because there's only two goods. All right, so we've talked about you gave up a lot of things to be here in class. In a real economy, to get a unit of food, you give up a lot of things. So it might be kind of difficult to identify the most valuable thing you gave up, but here it's easy because there's only two goods. So my question was last time, what's the cost of the first ton of food? So the idea is you start here at this point here, and how do we calculate the cost of the first ton? Does anyone remember? So we're kind of like estimating where this point is here. It is the what class? Y'all remember? Yeah, I heard it. Someone's going to say it. Well, I heard someone go which is first letter in the word slope, right? Remember us talking about slope? The slope of the line that connects this point of the curve. Well, they got the same kind of gnats here that I have at home. I tell my sweet wife, I say, you keep bringing those vegetables in the kitchen. At any rate, it's the slope of that curve. What you gave up to get the first unit on the x-axis is the slope of the secant, or straight line that joins those 2 points. Now, of course, that's a curve, and so forth. But at any rate, if you take the slope of that, like there's a little right triangle here, it's a change in y, or the change in military goods, Abrams tanks per year. You always have to have a frame of time here. How many tanks did you give up to get an increment in the good on the x-axis by 1? That is 1 additional ton of food. So if you start at A here, you're only making military goods. You're not making any. Food. Okay. So to make the first unit of food, you're going to move from A to this point, and so you estimate the slope of that. Okay. So what did we say? We had a rule last time. We said the slope of the curve, the PPC, will give you the opportunity cost of the good on the x-axis. Okay, on the x-axis. Not on the y-axis, but on the x-axis. You can get the opportunity cost of a good on the y-axis by taking the reciprocal of the slope, or taking your paper. Okay, if it's like transparent paper, it'd be easy. You can exchange or interchange the x and y axis. You flip your paper by the 45-degree line, this line here. You'll exchange the role of the x and y axis in doing that. But in either case, the opportunity cost of a unit on the x-axis found by the slope of this line here, what we call a secant line. It cuts. Secare means to cut. Now, notice what this is a kind of a profound thing I want us to grab onto here. Production possibilities curves are always concave to the origin. They're always concave to the origin. They always, not only do they slope down, but they don't slope down this way. They're curved for a very good reason. For a very good reason. And we would call that, and there's two different ways we use this expression I want to mention here, but we would call that the law of increasing opportunity cost. Or marginal cost, really. Marginal means the cost of one more. I don't know why for the moment. I don't know which form your book uses, but it means the same. We're talking the opportunity cost of one more unit. So a lot of times you'll hear the law of increasing marginal cost. Let me just use that here because it's usually what you hear. Okay. Now that law, there's two different places where we talk about a law of increasing marginal cost. Here's one. Okay. We'll talk about the other in a little bit when we get to production for a single supplier. But the idea here is on this curve here, when you're fully devoting resources to production, and that's what you're doing at points A, B, C, and D, and so forth. If you're operating here, you could have more of this good, military goods, you could have more food. You have unemployed resources, so you could have more of both. So you're not at this point fully engaging or employing your resources. So only these points out here on the boundary fully employ the resources of the macroeconomy toward production. And when you do that, you're faced with choices or trade-offs. So the only way we could get that first tank here, if we're already fully employing our resources here, making military goods, the only way we could do that is by doing with fewer tanks, okay? You had to give up something to get something. So that's always the case in this thing right here. And what I'm saying here is, in this law of increasing marginal cost or opportunity cost, so here we'll use these synonymously here, with what you're giving up for one more unit, opportunity cost on the next unit increases. Okay? As you have more of a good, then the opportunity or marginal cost, the cost associated with one more unit is going to increase. Okay? So if I don't have any food, it's a pretty small opportunity cost. That's a pretty shallow line. Remember, the slope is the opportunity cost of the first unit. But notice, if I want the second unit, what happens? It gets steeper, doesn't it? It gets steeper. It gets steeper, gets steeper, gets steeper. This is real world, friends. Okay? Now why? Okay, it's real world. If you start describing the economy, we need to understand why is it this way. That is to say here, the more of this good right here, the more of that you have, the more you got to give up to get another unit of it. Okay, that would be increasing marginal cost. So if I have 3 tons of food and I want another one, man, looky here. If I want to go from 3 to 4, I'm going to go from this point over here. That's I'm giving up a lot of military goods, right? Y'all see that? So rise over run here, delta y over delta x is really big. So the question is, why is this real world? Why is this common sense? Common sense. This is common sense. And so I'm hoping to do a little Socratic method here, because you already know intuitively it's back there. But that's the neat thing about microeconomics. A lot of this is really back in the recesses of your brain. You just need someone to ask you the right question to bring it to the forefront of your brain, really. We're all that way. Don't mean to disparage anybody. But why is it? Okay, so let me tell you a little story. Maybe we'll think about it this way. Suppose you have an orchard. And let's say you go out to your orchard. It's an apple orchard. And you go out there once a week, say on Monday morning. You go out there once a week. You look around, well, look at all these apples and my trees. I got 50 acres of apple trees. And you decide, hey, I'm going to pick some apples and take them to market. So just every week you just see apples have grown on my trees. They're nice and red and they're ready to pick. Okay? So you got some apples on low branches, okay? And you got some apples way up here in the trees up here, okay? So you got low-hanging fruit, and you got fruit way up in the trees. Okay, so first off, common sense. Which apples are you going to pick first? We know, right? The low-hanging fruit. You always pick the low-hanging fruit first. Always. And you know what? That might be all you'll pick and take to market if the price of apples not very high. You're just going to go through and pull a few. Well, I mean, they're only giving me $5 for a ton of apples. I'm not going to pick very many. All right? So the market's not going to reward you very much for your apples, so you only pick a few. All right? So you pick the low-hanging fruit first. But next week, what do you think? Price of apples skyrocketed. So suppose now they'll give you $1,000 for a ton of apples. I don't know. That's certainly better. You're going to pick the low-hanging fruit, aren't you? But what else are you going to do? You're going to go get the cherry picker and the ladder, and you're going to go get your friends, and you're going to get those apples up here. So what's the point here? It's called the low-hanging fruit principle. It's common sense. It's another expression of the law of increasing marginal cost. if you want to produce more apples, you want to take more apples to market, then you start reaching beyond the low-hanging fruit to the fruit that's costly to get. Make sense? And the only way you're going to do that, we're going to call this the law of supply later. When the market rewards a supplier with a higher price per unit, they'll find a way to get those apples up there. There's a positive relationship between price and quantity that farmers will bring to market. The price of wheat goes up. It's been going up for a long time. You're going to quit growing barley and you're going to grow wheat, what have you. That's actually the law of supply we'll be talking about later. It's a context or a reformulation, really, of this low-hanging fruit principle. Always pick the low-hanging fruit. You do the easy stuff first, right? If you're smart about living life, you'll do that too. Just lots of things. I always ask myself, if I got several things to do, I tell myself I only have so much time, and gosh, maybe I can get it all done, but I'll have to stay up late tonight, and I'm getting tired of doing that. So I'll do the easy things, it's things I know I can do. That's called the low-hanging fruit principle. Well, you're going to see that here in the PPC, or Production Possibilities Frontier. Let's go back to this just a second, just to make sure we understand. Okay? So the production, so here, that first ton of apples, there's a ton of food here. You bring to market in a period of time, per year, per week, whatever, it doesn't cost you much. That's the deal. That's the low-hanging fruit. Okay? Oh, now in the next period of time, per year, you want to bring 2 tons of wheat to market. Okay? So you're going to have to reach higher in the trees. Okay? So that's just kind of an idea here, is you see increasing opportunity cost with each successive unit you bring to market. Now this is true for an individual supplier. For an individual supplier, you just got an apple orchard, maybe you're a furniture maker and you make chairs, and it's a special kind of chair, and so you got a contract with the government to make a bunch more chairs next week. You might start working late at night. It gets more costly and so forth. There's lots of things that we talk about. It's also true, and I said that this law of increasing marginal cost has application not only for a single supplier, but also for the macroeconomy. This is a model of the macroeconomy. You see, when you have a macroeconomy that produces things, its resources could be this simple. It could be just you and me, citizens here. And we all vary in our capabilities to produce goods. Some people are good at producing military goods, okay? They like working in a factory and so forth. Other people, I wouldn't be one of these because I'd have to load on the sunscreen, but other people like working outside and working on the farm. Now you think about it a second. Same idea as the low-hanging fruit. Okay, if we have an economy that's just producing, say, military goods, that point A there, and you decide to start making agricultural goods, then you're first going to tap into the resources that have a small opportunity cost. Okay, the people, you're going to first use people who are relatively better at agriculture than mechanical things. Just go one more time back to this, just to drive this home. Same idea. This is so important because this is half of the story we're going to look at in this course when we talk about supply and demand. That first unit of food, you're going to have to shift some people away from making tanks to making food. Now you got 2 people in front of you. Maybe you got 100 people in your economy, okay? So you say, okay, I'm going to send somebody over to the factory. I guess here we're sending them to the farm, aren't we? They've all been working in the factory. We've got to send somebody out there to the farm to grow potatoes or whatever it is. So you look at all your workers in this macroeconomy, 100 people, who are you going to select? Are you going to select somebody like me, okay, who sunburns real easy? Is that fair? It's blinding, right? I can't see. Or are you going to take somebody else who's used to working outside? You know, I'm relatively better working in a factory than out hoeing rows of potatoes. Okay, I'm probably not very good at either one, but I come at a smaller opportunity. You give up less of this to get a unit of this with somebody who can work outdoors a lot more than I do. Does that make sense? Resources vary in their capacity, their capability to produce these two goods. So it's the same thing as it's the low-hanging fruit principle. Instead of the one farmer saying, I'm going to just pick the fruit on the bottom here to take to market, and we'll be coming back to that. Now in the macroeconomy, we say, hey, we want 1 ton of food. Let's select somebody out there who is pretty good at farming and that's their specialty, if you will. That's what they're good at. All right. So you keep doing that. As you increase output of food, eventually, if you push it to the wall, you're going to say, hey, Dr. J, Brian Jackson, you also go out there and grow food. Okay? So the idea, but that would be pretty costly. It would be pretty costly to start tapping into people who aren't as well suited for doing or producing that good on the x-axis as you produce more of that good on the x-axis. So I want you to think about that, kind of my way of telling the story, if you will, of the law of increasing opportunity cost or marginal cost. We'll be revisiting this. Again, I'm using that law, if you will. It's just common sense. There's two different contexts here. We kind of think about it in terms of, there's the macroeconomy. We start with a two-good economy, so you're shifting from one good to another. Or for a single producer, okay? That's when we get really into microeconomics and production theory. Later, we'll be doing some of this. A single producer, who wants to ratchet up output of whatever good or service they're producing. We got a new contract again for barrels of oil, tables, whatever it is. You start working late at night, your equipment starts wearing out and so forth. You are reaching higher into the trees to produce those units. Okay, so at any rate, that's I thought important because again, it just kind of gives us a philosophy that we're going to be looking at as we look a little bit more into supply and demand. Any questions? Any idea? Any thoughts on this? We mentioned economic systems, that we in the United States are in a market system. However, something has happened just this week that kind of challenges that assumption a little bit, or that idea, just a little bit. The U.S. government bought a big stake in what? Intel. Have you been following that? So there was a CHIPS Act under President Biden, shunting all this money over into high-tech, AI, and so forth. So President Trump says, hey, tells Intel, says, hey, we want some stock in return for this. The federal government, the government is actually going to own stock in a private company. And this doesn't happen very often. Last most notable time I remember this when the government took some stock in General Motors, okay, when General Motors was in trouble back there. But you don't have purely private ownership here of all the factors of production. You have some public ownership there, and then you have others, of course. But when a government, say, begins to acquire equity in private companies, you're drifting more into a kind of a socialistic system. Now, in Great Britain and other countries that are more socialistic than the U.S., for sure, large businesses, if you will, become state-owned over time. Utilities and so forth will be owned by the government. Without getting too specific about that, there have been movements both ways on that. Okay, so when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, there was a movement toward privatizing, and there have been other efforts at privatizing the utilities industries and so forth. But at any rate, there's a blend out there. I want you to be aware of that and so forth. Okay, so in chapter 2, just kind of wrap things up. Be sure to read these 2 chapters, if you will. There are 5, what your book calls fundamental questions that every economic system has to answer. 5 questions. Now, I'll just say, It's on page 32. I would not like on an exam. So to alleviate any angst anyone might have, oh, I got to remember these 5. I got to memorize them. No, I'm not big on memorizing things. But you should kind of recognize these. If you saw these, getting ready for an exam, you should know when there's an outlier. If I gave you 4 things and said which of these is not one of the 5 fundamental questions for an economic system, you should notice or should be able to identify which one doesn't belong, okay? I hope that makes sense. So I'm not going to say list them all then. I wouldn't do that. I'd have trouble doing that. But the 5 fundamental questions are on page 32 of your text. So let's look at this just briefly. Here we go. Whoa. Okay, there's what, okay? What goods and services will be produced, okay? How will the goods and services be produced? So you got what, how, who will get the output? How will the system accommodate change? And how will the system promote technological progress? Okay, so these are the 5 fundamental questions that these 3, broadly speaking, economic systems have to answer. What are the 3 systems again? Laissez-faire at one end, the command system at the other end, and in the middle, the big middle, everything's kind of moving toward this around the world is the market system. Even, in communist countries, you guys are too young. Heck, your parents may be too young, but alas, I remember the fall of what was called the Iron Curtain in Europe when the Soviet Union went away in '91. Your parents would remember this, surely. But at any rate, the fall of communism I've witnessed in my lifetime, and there's communist systems that try to answer these things by telling everybody what to do. Okay, and so. But the USSR has adopted a lot of market reforms, and so has the PRC, the People's Republic of China. Okay? There used to be no private ownership of property in the PRC. None. Okay? Everything was owned by the state. Now they've learned, we're getting tired of these long bread lines and so forth. So there have been the adoption of market reforms around the world. There are a few countries that regress, that are stubborn, and so forth. Your book talks about Venezuela. Okay? So, they've been stubborn and kind of going against the current of history. They've become, until recently, under Chavez and then Maduro, have become very much of a command system, communist country. But people actually starving to death in Venezuela. I had a very, very, very good friend in graduate school from Caracas. He used to tell me when we were students together in the math program at OU years ago, he'd tell me how wonderful Caracas was. And I haven't seen him since graduated. I've wondered how he's done there because things have not been good. They've had that coordination problem. They've had the incentive problem. They had lots of corruption. You have lots of corruption in command systems. So Venezuela is suffering from that. But at any rate, the question, what goods and services will be produced in a market system? And that's the one we're going to think about in terms here, because alas, that's where we live, is in the United States. Who determines what kind of automobiles are produced by General Motors and Ford? We do, don't we? Consumers. So you have something called consumer sovereignty. So when it says here, what goods and services will be produced? Consumers do, okay? And so it's consumers that determine whether or not a company will make a profit on whatever good it brings to market. Has anyone ever heard of the Edsel? You know who Edsel was? He was Henry Ford's son, Edsel Ford. And so Henry Ford, they designed a vehicle, body style, it was the early 50s, after Edsel Ford. It didn't look like him, but it did. But they couldn't sell it, okay? It was more or less designed in a vacuum, and Ford could not sell those things. There was a hard lesson learned. Just because you think you got a good idea as a producer doesn't really mean the consumer thinks it's a good idea. And if you want to earn a profit, you better do a little market research first. There was a breakdown there. So in general, in a market system, consumers answer this question: what goods and services will be produced? I think we know that, right? How will the goods and services be produced? That's the second question. Now, your book looks at an example here. They look at this on page 33 here. Let me see if I can back this off. They give you this little example here, producing $15 worth of bar soap, okay? I'm sorry. I'm going to have to figure out a different way to do this. But there's 3 different techniques here. And here's your resources: land, labor, capital, and the cost of each. And I guess there's entrepreneurial activity. At any rate, you get 3 different costs because there's 3 different combinations. Each is specific to a technique to produce $15 worth of soap. Some soap that's going to be sold for $15. Now, if you got I don't know, maybe that's a barrel of soap, going to sell it for $15. You're going to use technique 2, right? Because it's the least cost approach. It opens a profit to you of $2. If one of these said 16, you're sure not going to do that because you'd be losing $1 on each unit of soap. So, I mean, the idea is simple here. You'll choose the least cost technique or the least cost approach. So, you want to minimize the cost per unit. That's the most efficient way to produce goods and services. Be sure and read that example. There's one of the homework questions like that, okay? So on Connect, when you work on the homework, they'll ask you, they'll give you a table like that and ask you which is the least cost approach and what's the profit for that approach. So it's simple, but all you have to do is read it, kind of think about it. Okay, so that's the second question. How will the goods and services be produced? Least cost. Another way of looking at that is which will, for a particular cost, which will produce the maximum output. 2 different ways. They call that the dual problem, but there's 2 different ways of looking at it. But here we'll just say the least cost approach. You don't want to use more cost if you're in business than you have to. Number 3, who will get the output? Who will get the output? You got to ration goods and services after all. In times of national exigency or even local exigency, say a hurricane comes through New Orleans and there's only a little bit of gasoline around, there's a way of rationing it. There have been different ways of doing it. Sometimes it's just brute force. It's whoever's the biggest who gets it, right? Or it's first come, first served. You might have long gas lines at the station. Whoever got there first gets gasoline. And if you were the 100th customer, you're probably getting pretty nervous. And you see people trying to, putting gasoline in their car and their cans and all that. So the point here is there's got to be a way to ration. And think beyond the way we normally use that term. But to distribute goods and services. In a market system, this is real easy. We will use these 2 words later in chapter 3. Okay? Chapter 3 is so foundational. The people who get it are those who are willing and able to purchase it. You've got to have both those things going for you. You've got to be willing to and able to. Okay? Now, if you're not willing to, I'm probably able to buy. I've been looking for land. I don't know if I ever own any. But I could probably buy 10 acres somewhere. But I don't necessarily want to buy any in most areas. So I'm not willing. The point is I might be able, but not willing. You've got to have both. Or if you're willing and not able, you might be willing to buy a Ferrari, but you're not able to. You've got to have both those things going. If those 2 things are going for you, you are what's called a demander. And that's the word I wanted to get to. A demander is someone who's willing and able to purchase the goods. So who will get the output? Those who are willing and able. How will the system accommodate change? Okay? They have change all the time. Heck, we are in a big change era right now in the economy. Everyone's hearing about AI. AI this, AI that. Artificial intelligence. It's very disruptive. It's so much so that there are people who are saying that, half of the white-collar jobs are going to go away. I don't know. I'm not a visionary. And then I hear other people say, no, they're not going to go away. It's just that, white-collar jobs are going to be more productive and so forth. But I can look back over history, and I can see where there are jobs that have gone away because of technology, completely gone away. I mean, have you been to a blacksmith lately? And I don't think there are any, right? Wheelwrights, make wheels and stuff. I mean, it's all, and even portraiture art or studio arts and stuff like that. I mean, we look at the Mona Lisa. Remember seeing the Mona Lisa? I could get within about 50 yards of it at the Louvre in France. Well, there's the Mona Lisa there. Everybody's oohing and ahhing. Couldn't get near it because it's a work of art. Leonardo was finished. But I don't know now. With artificial intelligence, they're saying that computers can do stuff like that. So, what does that do to someone who has trained, spent their life learning a craft or something like that? Well, to some extent, some get displaced. So the point here is there's change, it's disruptive and so forth. There's a couple of names you might associate with this term called creative destruction. Okay, you hear that in economics a lot. When you create new things, you wind up destroying old things, old jobs and so forth. And so Marx talked about this a little bit. And he said that's ultimately going to bring down the market system. Is it because of creative destruction? And then Joseph Schumpeter came along later and he said, no, that's actually good for the economy. There is such a thing called creative destruction. It's a term you might look up. Creative destruction, you hear people use that term a lot. But the thing is, technological change displaces old technologies and old ways of doing things. So an economic system has to be able to accommodate that technological change. Has to be able to accommodate that. Now we have trouble. I mean, you guys in school, you're looking at, what kind of accountants are they going to need in 20 years if you're an accounting major? You got to answer that question for yourself. In a communist system, somebody else is answering that question for you. Okay? Somebody else is answering that. So you think about which of those approaches, a command system or a market system, free market system, which one of those ultimately is going to fare the best over the course of time? I mean, both are going to have challenges, right? But you, at your level, you know your desires, you know your gifts, you know your talents. No one knows you like you. And you can gather information for yourself. No one can make that decision, that career choice decision, as well as you can for yourself. Take in the information, but the society, the culture, the macroeconomy is going to be better off if you make that decision for yourself. So in a market system, we accommodate change and so forth by making these individual choices, these decisions. We try to look at where things are going to be in the future. So that's the fourth question, okay? The fifth one, how would the system promote technological process? That's kind of the same thing. How would they promote technological progress? In other words, number 4 deals with the fact of technological progress. Number 5 deals with how do you facilitate technological progress? How do you encourage that, okay? And, different economic systems have different ways of doing that as well. To some extent, in the U.S., we subsidize a lot. That's where this stake in Intel from the government, the CHIPS Act and all that. We don't, in the United States, want to be left behind with respect to microprocessors. I'm probably using an antiquated term. Okay, thank you. And so, the government's done this in the past, but the government will pump a bunch of money into an industry to help encourage change. They sometimes, you may have heard the term infant industry argument for government intervention and so forth. Sometimes, like in the steel industry, what's interesting about the steel industry in the United States is that for a while, we're playing catch up with Japan. How did that happen? Because we had U.S. Steel and Andrew Carnegie here. Well, the deal is we bombed Japan into smithereens during World War II, and they had to start over. And they started over with new technology. And so now we have to catch up. So sometimes, I mean, there's an argument to be made that, I mean, who saw that event coming about? The private equity firms back in the 30s, see that happening, 20. Sometimes the government has to embark on a deliberate policy of saying, hey, we're all going to gear up here and catch up with the rest of the world. You saw that with automobiles in Japan. See, I recall, and we'll get away from the stories next time, we'll get more into meat and potatoes, but I recall my dad bought the second Toyota to come into Houston, Texas. The number 2 Toyota to come into Houston, Texas. I recall it was a Toyota Corolla. My dad bought it, and I think he paid $2,400 for it. It was a pretty car, blue Corolla. No one knew what those things were. They had disparaging terms for them too. I won't. But it's like, you bought one of those? Toyota. That's how old I am, because that was before what happened in the 70s with Deming and so forth. Toyota became known for quality. Now you want a Toyota. Oh, yeah, you want quality. You're buying quality, aren't you? Okay, so the point here is that, things change over time. And, you don't know where the macroeconomy is going to be shortly down the road. So Toyota is a safe bet today, isn't it? Okay, I'd like to look a little bit at chapter 3. By the way, for those of y'all who don't know, since this is live TV, I have to go to we have what's called a hard break, but it's at 2:15. So we're almost there. But I want to introduce chapter 3 today, unless y'all have any questions over chapter 2. Okay, chapter 3. We get into something here that about everybody associates with microeconomics. The law of supply and demand. Or I say the law of, I'll just say supply and demand. Supply and demand. We're going to talk about these things here. Kind of look at the high level here today. I had a good friend of mine. He's passed away since. He was much older than me. But I remember he would often say, that's all economics is supply and demand. And in some sense, I guess that's true. So we're going to talk about supply and demand. So your book begins this journey on page 45 with a discussion of what markets are. Okay, so we know what markets are, right? They're venues where two kinds of people come together. What kinds of people are they? Buyers and sellers, okay? Buyers and sellers. So as a household, and sometimes you may be a buyer, sometimes you may be a seller. Okay, so on one side, so market is a place where buyers and sellers come together. On one side of that, we model the behavior or talk about the behavior of participants, the buyers, by something called demand. Okay, demand. All right, so there's this term that we're going to define today, demand. Okay, so on page 46, for me, 2 words you need to associate with demand. Willingness and what? Ability. You are a demander for a good if you're willing and able to purchase the good. So let's go back here and we're going to look at some of this vocab here today. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so we'll look at demand, and we'll talk about a demand schedule here in a minute, or table of numbers. We're going to graph one of these things. There's a graph here at the bottom of your page we'll look at in just a minute. Right there. But at any rate, we're talking about potential buyers here. People who are, and I underline that, consumers are willing and able to purchase at each of a series of possible prices. If you quantify the number of consumers who are willing and able to purchase at various prices, you'll have this thing down here called the demand curve. All right, I want to talk about that just a little bit. This is called the demand curve. It's downward sloping, okay? Downward sloping in what? I got to tell you more than that. I mean, if I rotate this by 90 degrees, it'd be upward sloping, right? So what do we mean by that? You have 2 axes. You have a price axis and you have a quantity axis, P and Q. In fact, let me just tell you, That old saying, watch your P's and Q's, comes from this. Watch your prices and quantities. Back, in retail establishments and that have prices up on the marquee or something, the menu behind the counter. If you don't want to get took, you always watch your prices and quantity. Watch your P's and Q's. Well, the story here is on one side of the market, the demand side, and there's what's called a negative relationship. A negative relationship between these two variables. That means when one goes up, the other goes down. Now here is what makes, and stick this in your mind right now because it'll make everything easier going forward. Here's what makes economics kind of difficult. In about every other field of study you're going to have in your undergraduate study, we put what's called the independent variable on the horizontal axis. Okay, down here. Call that the x-axis, all right? It's called the independent variable. The independent variable is the variable. It's independent. It can roam. If you'll think back, thank you, Miller. If you'll think back how you learn to sketch a function, back there you do in school, you do a little t-chart and you have x on one side. Remember, you just choose some values for x, and then that determines the value for y. So you have an independent variable and a dependent variable. In about any other field of study, you're going to encounter the independent variable is on the horizontal axis. But it's not so in economics. Okay, it goes back to Alfred Marshall, I think, the story is, when Alfred Marshall wrote one of the first, and he wrote one of the very first big economics textbooks. For some reason or another, I don't know the full thought behind it, but he put the independent variable on the vertical axis. So let's go back and look at that picture again and see what I'm talking about. And this is so fundamental because if you don't get this down now, you're not going to know how to shift these curves and so forth later, as we're going to do. It is the price of a good that determines the number of people who are both willing and able to purchase it. Quantity. Okay, at a high price, there aren't very many people who are willing and able to purchase this many 10 gallons of gasoline per week. So if the price of gasoline is at $5 a gallon, there aren't very many gallons of gasoline that will be demanded. Not many people are willing and able at that high price. $5 a gallon, I remember when it was $5. But the thing is, we see that at a high price, there is a small quantity that of units people are willing and able to purchase. This is common sense, right? First off. Now, it's deeper than this, okay? We're going to see in a minute. When the price goes down, the number of units that people are willing and able to purchase goes up. There's this negative relationship between the two variables. Negative relationship. Okay, this is the law of demand. It's the principle that ceteris paribus, remember we defined that term, means all other things equal. It's the Latin for this thing right here. Sometimes you'll see set par there. It's the principle that ceteris paribus, an increase in a product's price will reduce the quantity of it demanded, and conversely for a decrease in the price. In other words, there's a negative relationship. Now here's the thing, a couple things I want to mention here, because we're about out of time. Now I forgot what I was going to say. I don't know why. But the one thing here is that, since this is the independent variable, very important, this is the independent variable, then if you were going to sketch this curve, you would put the x-axis, the independent variable here. Remember, the independent variable is on the y-axis. So remember back in school when you do an x-y chart like this to plot, the independent variable, you'd write values for it first. Well, notice that's price here. So this is the independent variable and this is the dependent variable. If we want to increase demand, that's different than increasing a function in any other course of study. In any other course, you shift a curve up if you increase it. You shift it down if you decrease it. Here, you'll shift it right. An increase in demand will be a right shift of that curve, not an upward shift. A decrease in demand or supply, works for both, is a left shift. So when we talk about increasing supply and demand, you're going to shift those curves, but not up and down as you want to do in other courses. You're going to shift them up and down, or left and right. And the last thing, read this for next time. If you took this course at MIT,